Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Very few people, though, are students of themselves, students of their own lives, students of their habits, students of what's going on in their world or what's going on in their emotions or what's going on in their thoughts. Most people spend very little time studying and mastering themselves, and as a result, they actually don't even know who they are. They're not clear on their thoughts, not clear on their emotions, not clear on their goals, and ultimately they're kind of aimless. They're rudderless. They're just influenced by outside forces and factors, and they're like a ship without a sail. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the number one tool for becoming a student of yourself, and that's obviously your journal. Jim Lair, who's a performance psychologist, he's trained a lot of Olympic athletes, a lot of the world's top performers. A big aspect of what he trains people to do is honestly journaling. And from my perspective, there's three key aspects of journaling for self-awareness, and then ultimately performance, and then ultimately self-creation. So the first aspect of it is self-awareness, actually becoming aware of your own self. Taking the time, using your journal as a reflection tool to look at, for example, what happened today. So if at the end of your day, you took the time to just think about your day and what went well and what didn't well, and then taking the time to assess what were maybe the factors. For example, yesterday for me wasn't necessarily the best day in terms of my performance. I actually came to work and I had a really hard time focusing. And so last night, I just took some time to journal and reflect on why didn't I have a good day? Like, what was I struggling with? And I just started to actually think about how things were going. And this allows awareness. That's one of the key aspects, is you can't actually change something unless you become aware of it. Freud said that you've got to make the unconscious conscious. And so a big aspect of journaling is just writing about what's going on, becoming aware of your thoughts, becoming aware of your feelings, becoming aware of the meanings you give to things. There's a lot of research, obviously, on how journaling can help you reframe trauma. Let's just say you have a trauma from your past, some negative or hard experience. Well, journaling about that, writing about it, and then thinking about how you feel about it, the meaning you've given to it, how it's affected you, that allows you to become aware of it. And once you become aware of it, you can ultimately change it. You can reframe it. You can change the meaning you gave to it. But you have to be aware that this is how you feel about it and how it's impacting you. There's a lot of research on the subject of what's called emotional regulation. So when you're stressed, when you're dealing with pressure, ultimately you want to write about how you're feeling, and that alone allows you to become aware of how you're feeling. It allows you to get it out in front of you, and then you can ultimately start thinking about it differently. You can choose the meanings you give to it. And so the first aspect of journaling is ultimately self-awareness, awareness of yourself, awareness of your feelings, awareness of the meanings you're giving to experiences, awareness of why you might be performing at the level you are. And I don't think that this needs to take long. I think that this aspect of journaling is probably best at night. Just taking a little bit of time, maybe 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the day, to just reflect on how that day went and maybe thinking about the factors that led to that. Why didn't I have a good day focusing yesterday? Well, I know I didn't sleep as long yesterday. I went to bed a little later than normal the night before. But what other things happened when I woke up? What were some of the things that threw me off? Just taking the time for self-awareness. The second aspect of journaling that allows you to become a student of your own self is tracking. And now this is something that a lot of people don't like to do, but if you actually start tracking your behavior or tracking your performance, you start to actually become aware of how you're doing. For example, if you started tracking how much money you spent, then you'd become aware of it. A lot of people, they don't know what's going on with their money. They don't know where it all goes because they're not tracking it. They don't have clear things that they're tracking. In order to actually track something correctly, you need to have clear goals. You have to measure something clearly. A lot of people, they don't have clear goals. They just have general goals. And if you're measuring yourself against general goals, you're never going to feel good, because general ideals or whatnot are always moving. And if you're always measuring something against a general, then you can't actually feel like you're making progress. So obviously a key aspect of tracking is, one, having measurable goals, but also then measuring various things. It's very healthy. As an example, Dan Sullivan talks about how the key to being happy is, obviously first you have to have clear measurables, clear goals you're going for, because you can actually measure how you're doing, but also measuring yourself against where you were. So taking the time to measure your progress. So that could be, for example, measuring how well you ate this week, like literally measuring your food, measuring your income, measuring how much if you're a writer, how many words you wrote. Like, taking time to measure is another powerful way of becoming aware. Once you become aware, you can then develop systems and tools and maybe get coaching or training or build goals to improve it. But if you're not aware of your own behavior, if you're not aware of your own performance, if you're not aware of your own self and your own life, then how can you be a student of yourself? You're actually literally not even sure who you are. Why would you want to go through life not knowing who you are? It's powerful to become aware of what's going on, to make the unconscious conscious, but also then to consciously focus on. There's a great concept called Pearson's Law. According to Pearson's Law, that which is measured improves. That which is measured and reported improves exponentially. So not only do you want to measure something, because when you measure it, literally almost by measuring it, it automatically improves because you're giving it attention, energy, and whatever you give attention and energy to grows. Whatever you focus on expands. And so if you're taking the time to just measure something, you're going to improve it. But if you measure and report it, if you have accountability, if you have maybe a daily accountability partner, if you have a weekly accountability group, if you're measuring and reporting your progress regularly, then your rate of improvement will grow exponentially. The first two are just general reflection. The second one is tracking. The third one, as far as using your tool to become a student of yourself, is ultimately your future self, imagining your future. Albert Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge. Well, the journal is one of the ultimate tools. Actually, it is the ultimate tool for self-creation. Your identity is how you see yourself. It's how you define and describe yourself. Most people are not very clear on their own identity. Your identity is the story you tell about yourself. It's your script. It's how you define and describe yourself. Most people, their identity is very past-centric, and it's also very fixed mindset. If someone was to ask you, who are you? You'd start then to tell the story about your past. Well, what would happen if you actually had imagined out your desired future self? You want to use your journal to ultimately define out your future self, to imagine future scenarios. You got to have imagination. You got to have play. You've got to think of amazing ideals in your future, but then ultimately to imagine your future self as that person and to really think about what that person is and ultimately to design your identity around that future self. One of the things that Jim Lair recommends is ultimately defining a script of the type of person you want to be so that when you're in a stressed out situation, you can use that script to remind you of the type of person you are. So for example, if you're having a really bad day and you're falling apart, maybe you could go back to your script. All right, this is the type of person I want to be. In psychology, that concept is actually called implementation intentions. It's when you start to fall apart or you get triggered or things start to get stressful, you then have a tool you turn to ultimately get you back on track. That's actually why in Alcoholics Anonymous, they have you have a sponsor. Because when you're triggered and you're getting ready to go and self-sabotage, you then have a strategy that you turn to immediately so that you don't fail and ultimately kill your confidence. So that your journal becomes your way of formulating your identity, the person you want to be. Not only do you want to be aware of your behavior and what's going on, but you want to ultimately become the designer of yourself. You want to design your identity. Your identity is the thing that drives your behavior. Your identity is based on your goals and your future, and it's based on what you give value and meaning to. You ultimately want to get really clear on what you give value and meaning to. You want to reframe the things that no longer matter, but you want to use your journal to define what matters to you, define what you care about, define what the good life is for you, and then to design your identity, the type of person you want to be. And then on a regular basis, obviously, you write in your journal about who you are, about how you're doing. You have people around you who matter, who care, who you can use to get feedback and support. You then share your new identity with other people. There's a great concept in psychology called the principle of consistency. And basically what the principle of consistency shows is that as human beings, we have an inherent need to be consistent internally with our words, our actions, and our identity. And so when you start telling people about your future self, you start telling people about the person you want to be, you then start to not only feel more compelled to be consistent with your story, you then have more social support and social accountability to live now up to the person you intend to be. So your journal is the ultimate tool for making the unconscious conscious, for becoming aware, for tracking your behavior and improving your behavior, but also for imagining and becoming your future self, for designing your identity, for emotionally regulating when things get stressful. The journal is the ultimate tool for helping you become a student of yourself. And if you're not going to be a student of yourself, then you're living an unexamined life. And the unexamined life isn't worth living. But also the opposite of that statement is true as well, that someone who's not living an amazing life isn't worth examining. Well, having a journal allows you to think of the peak experiences you want to have. It allows you to live courageously. It allows you to commit to your future self. It allows you to think of what you actually want for yourself, because what other people think about you is none of your business. And it allows you then to actually be connected to yourself so that you're running your own race. There's a great quote from Bob Marley, and he says that the moment you stop racing is the moment you win the race. A lot of people, they're not clear on who they are, and so they're running the wrong races. They're running the races of other people. They are not clear on who they are, and so they're ultimately living the values and the goals and the agendas of other people, but they're also not measuring themselves correctly, so they're not happy. They're measuring themselves against the ideals or just the results of other people, and comparison is the thief of joy. But if you start to actually become the student of yourself, then you can measure yourself correctly. Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach, calls this measuring the gain rather than the gap. Taking the time to track and report your progress on your measurable goals. So taking the time to actually track and assess where you are right now versus where you were before. That's another very powerful thing that you could do in your journal, is ultimately reflecting on where you are right now versus where you want to be, but also where you are right now versus where you were before. That's something I literally did in my journal today, is I literally just wrote a list of my situation right now, where I'm at right now, what's going on. But then I took the time to write down what was my life like 5 years ago. It's very powerful to measure where you are right now versus where you were before. That allows you to have happiness, confidence, success, hope. That then bolsters your imagination, your excitement, and your play towards your future self. So those are the 3 key things that I recommend you use your journal for. Reflecting, generally just reflecting at the end of the day, how you were doing, what's going on, how you are feeling. 2 is tracking the specific things you're trying to improve. And then ultimately, number 3 is designing your future self, designing your identity, using your imagination to create the future experiences you want to have, and then scripting out your identity so that then you now can better explain yourself to other people, because your identity shapes your future behavior, and your future behavior ultimately becomes a feedback loop for your identity. So as you behave and act in certain ways, you're going to start to see yourself as that person. So ultimately, as you design your future self, your future identity, and then you start acting that way, it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and ultimately you're going to become the person that you want to be. That builds your confidence, your hope, your momentum towards your future self. That is how you use your journal to become the student and the master and the creator of yourself. My name is Dr. Benjamin.